Hope all is well, everybody. Hope you had a good Sunday. No bye weeks this week, so we had a ton of football today. A lot of stuff going on. A lot of tough decisions going into today. It sucks when a lot of teams are on bye, but then when all of your players are like somewhat available for you, you have some tough decisions to make. And I had some tough decisions to make in my lineups. I'm sure you guys had some tough decisions to make. I think this was one of the toughest weeks, so far to make decisions in terms of like who to have in your lineup. I'm sure not a lot of people had DeAndre Hopkins in their lineup this week after, based on what's going on. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Um, but let's start with another guy who has just been on an absolute tear, dude. AJ Brown just continues to get it done in a huge way. 8 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. The matchup was there. He came through. He was your wide receiver one for the week, Zach. He's the first wide receiver ever to have 125 or more receiving yards for 6 straight games. This guy cannot be stopped right now. One of the best picks in fantasy this year. I remember people laughing at me when I was taking AJ Brown in the first round of drafts, like this year. It was kind of, I just remember that. It was kind of funny. And coming into this week, we said that if Devonta Smith can't come through in this matchup, we won't know what to do. But he came through. Okay, he caught all 7 of his targets for 99 yards and a touchdown. Julio Jones also caught a touchdown in this game. That was his only catch of the game. But just an interesting nugget there. Don't pick him up or anything. But this could be an opportunity to move on from Devonta Smith if you want to capitalize on a big game, because it's really the AJ Brown show at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the AJ Brown show, and like you mentioned, I had him as my fantasy wide receiver one. He wasn't the fantasy wide receiver one this week, but it was definitely worthy of that type of performance. He had 2 touchdowns. That's all you could ask for, and that one-hander on the side, just freaking ridiculous. It just seems like anytime Jalen Hurts throws the ball up, it's like that 15, 20, 25-yard, just over to the sideline, right by the pylon. It's just he's going to come down with it every time. It's automatic, but it's crazy because he only has 5 scores this season. Those 5 scores came across 3 separate games. That's it. So he's got 3 touchdowns over the past 2. That number could continue to go up. And I think what we've seen these past 2 weeks, the scoring of the touchdowns, is something that could happen, more and more moving forward. We might see he's been on a tear, but this production is sustainable the way that he's producing. And you mentioned about Devonta Smith. I think this is definitely a good time to sell him. I'm not holding on to him at all. Not only did he have that performance, like you mentioned, that it's actually like something where you could be like, okay, I can sell with this. He had 99 yards, just under 100 yards, and that touchdown. Like, you're not going to be able to sell him. You weren't able to sell him last week. Now you're going to be able to sell him this week. Don't bank on it happening again. The fact that he was able to do it this week with AJ Brown scoring 2 touchdowns is completely against the odds performance. I'm not buying that Devonta Smith is here to stay. We talked about it this past week, how AJ Brown, he's just been on a new level. Like, the target shares aren't even close to what we saw last season. It's a completely different offense. So I think AJ Brown, he's not going to allow Devonta Smith to live in wide receiver one land, much longer. But I also had Devonta Smith. I think it was my wide receiver 13 on the week. And I know you said something about that on the podcast when we were going over our matchups. It was a good matchup against the Commanders, and he came through. I'm happy for him. But like you mentioned, I'm definitely moving off him if I have him.
100%, man. I talked about Sam Howell as one of my starts this week. He ended up throwing for 397 yards and 4 touchdowns. He is a quarterback who, might not put up a lot of wins in the actual NFL win column, but he can put up some big fantasy numbers, right? Any given week. And, he's going to end up being one of the top quarterbacks this week. Let me see where he's ranked so far among quarterbacks. He is number 1. He is number 1 right now, right over Josh Allen and Dak Prescott. So he's gonna, he's likely gonna finish this week as QB1 potentially. Unless, listen, man, we have Tyson Badgett going tonight, so like you never know.
Can't rule it out. I mean, we just saw Will Levis do it. So, like, the limited experience that come through. But Sam Howell, over the past 3 weeks, he has 4 top 8 finishes. Like, that's the upside you're chasing when you put him in your lineup. And we talked about that. He's not this play where you're gonna be like confident in him every single week where it's like, okay, he's gonna have a good fantasy floor for me. But when he hits that ceiling, which he's done these past 4 weeks, like, this is really awesome stuff. Like, he's a QB1, definitely, right now. He's worth it. He's just not as solid as other quarterback QB1s. Like, obviously, I'm not going to compare him to Jalen Hurts, but you have other quarterbacks that get it done on a weekly basis. Sam Howell's right up there. Like, you gotta give him his flowers here. He's not somebody that's, QB2 is like maybe he hits that upside. He's hitting it more often than not. So that was a really good call on Sam Howell coming in this one.
He played well. He had, like one or two like game defining mistakes, in this game. And that's what it ended up coming down to, because the game was close throughout. But Jahan Dotson, starting to finally show something, right? 8 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets after everybody, including myself, dropped his ass. McLaurin had a solid game as well on 12 targets, but 8 targets last week for Dotson, 10 this week. Things are looking a little bit better for Dotson. Can we trust him, or was this just a good matchup, right? That's the question. He's very talented, right? Obviously, like, I think he's extremely talented. I think he's definitely a buy in Dynasty. But, hoping that this is the start for something, of something for Dotson. It is worth noting that Jamison Crowder also had a big game, 7 for 95 and a touchdown, because Curtis Samuel ended up leaving with a toe injury. He was already dealing with the foot coming into the game. Curtis Samuel was. Maybe this will end up meaning more opportunity for Dotson moving forward, but it also looks like Howell just loved targeting his slot receiver, like whoever it is, right? Like, given Crowder got all these looks today.
And the good matchup too, like you mentioned. Like, I was expecting them to do pretty well. And Jahan Dotson, he came through. And Terry McLaurin, he had 12 targets. I'm not worried about Terry McLaurin. He still played very well. He had that touchdown early. It looked like he was going to be on his way to a bigger day than he actually had. But overall, like, you just have to be happy about this. I don't know where Jamison Crowder came from. I wasn't expecting that at all. But another thing that was interesting to me, we talked about Brian Robinson and Chris Rodriguez over this past week. Chris Rodriguez didn't get a touch. It was hilarious. And now Brian Robinson, he's just, and it was a neutral game script. It was just a lot of passing for some reason with Sam Howell. But Brian Robinson, when they were running the ball, it was Brian Robinson. He also had 2 targets. Antonio Gibson, obviously, he was the receiving back like he has been. But I just found that interesting because suddenly Chris Rodriguez, off the heels of probably his best performance as a pro, obviously it's not that much. I expected him to have some run here, and he didn't get any of it. So that's something to monitor. Brian Robinson still had a quiet day, but I'm not, overlooking the fact that he was the lead back here. He could still be a high RB3, low RB2 moving forward. Maybe last week was just an apparition. Who knows?
Yep, 100%. That was fun, though, with Chris Rodriguez. He played 0 snaps in this game. Really liked Nico Collins this week. He didn't come through. But this Texans offense, man, just didn't show up. This might have been C.J. Stroud's worst game as a pro. Only 140 yards passing. Not what you want to see. I had Tank Dell outside my top 36 wide receivers this week, but, I did like him as an upside flex play in this matchup. And the Panthers defense just came through. I'm going to continue to start Collins as a wide receiver too, moving forward. But, I think they should bounce back next week against Tampa. But this was definitely a little bit of a disappointing performance, I'd say.
Very disappointing. And I don't know what was going on with the Texans offense because I was expecting them to be a lot better than they were. Like, Noah Brown came back, and suddenly the whole balance in the Texans wide receiver room was completely thrown off. But that's because we've seen the Texans hyper target their top guys. Tank Dell was earning targets. Nico Collins was earning targets. The guys that were supposed to be earning targets were getting them, and the guys that weren't getting the targets. But suddenly now you come back, you have 4 pass catchers with between 4 and 6 targets this game. Nico Collins obviously led the team with 6, but it was a just well-distributed target distribution with CJ Stroud, but it only amounted to 140 yards. I think that's what happens when you start throwing it to guys like Noah Brown a lot, and when you start throwing it to guys that shouldn't be getting the ball a whole lot. Also, we talked about Dalton Schultz. Maybe I put it in the newsletter, and you and I talked about it coming in the week. Like, Tank Dell coming back could affect Dalton Schultz coming in this matchup. Dalton Schultz had 2 catches for 5 yards, so that was interesting. The whole offense was off. I'm going to give them a mulligan here. CJ Stroud did salvage his fantasy day. It wasn't a complete egg in your lineup because he had that rushing touchdown, but man, it was just gross. So yeah, I'm not worried about Nico Collins. I think Tank Dell still is that upside play that we talked about him being moving forward. But outside of that, there's not really anybody in the receiving core for the Texans that I'm interested in starting on a weekly basis.
Nico Collins still had a 25% target share in this game. Not super worried about him. If Tank Dell ends up getting dropped in your league, I would go ahead and scoop him right back up. Okay. We were wondering about this Texans backfield coming into this week, right? It was, in fact, a 50-50 split between Pierce and Singletary. Mike Boone was getting snaps here and there, okay? But despite the good matchup, this was a really good matchup, obviously, against the Panthers coming in on the ground. neither of these guys could come through with only 11 opportunities for each of them. Probably want to stay away from this backfield right now if this continues to be this type of split and if they can't make it happen, against the Panthers' run defense, right? On the other side of the ball, the big takeaway, I think, from this entire game was Chuba Hubbard seemingly taking over this Panthers backfield. Miles Sanders practiced in full all week. They're coming off the bye. He's presumably healthy, right? But he only had 2 carries on 12 total snaps. He ended up with 0 total yards, 0 total fantasy points. Chuba Hubbard led the backfield with 67% of snaps and 17 opportunities. He couldn't get anything going in this new role, but he's a must pick up on waivers this week if he's available, right? If you already have him, if you already picked him up, if he was already stashed on your team, I think he's startable as a flex play, potentially low end RB2 in certain matchups if this role continues for him. Now, do I expect this to be like, just a Chuba Hubbard dominated snap share for the rest of the year? Probably not. They paid Miles Sanders a ton of money, right? I think this is going to be, somewhat closer to a 50-50, but that's not what we saw in this game. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward.
And I think part of what makes it so surprising is that the Panthers were coming off their bye. Miles Sanders is supposed to be getting healthy. You know what I mean? Like, he's supposed to come back. He'd have a decent role here. And now suddenly Chuba Hubbard, he dominates the snap share, and that, the usage share like he hasn't all season. And it's just like this is uncharted territory for Miles Sanders. You mentioned the money that they paid him. I was expecting Miles Sanders to have at least a little bit of run in this game. He had those 2 carries, but I was expecting more than that. The fact that Raheem Blackshear was getting more opportunities than him, it just shouldn't happen. That's the way I look at it. But Chuba Hubbard, I figured that he would be the guy in the backfield. I think that was the same thing that you said, coming into the week. I think that he's a flex play at best here. I'm not trusting the Panthers offense right here outside of Adam Thielen, who also had himself a good game. He's continuing to get that target share. Awesome to see. But yeah, Chuba Hubbard, that was the primary takeaway from this game. It was just a really weird game overall because I was expecting more points. I didn't think it was going to be close. Good on the Panthers for winning. They finally got their first win, but only 28 total points between these two teams. And it's just like, I thought the Texans had way more opportunities. They actually squandered some opportunities in this game. They're definitely better than what they played like today. So I wouldn't worry about the Texans, but the Panthers offense, I'm not trusting him. Chuba Hubbard is a flex. That's his ceiling in my book.
Yeah, and we talked about it, before the bye week that Chuba was top 10 in both missed tackles forced per attempt and yards after contact per attempt, right? And to be honest with you, like Miles Sanders wasn't good, right? Like this entire season. So there was a reason for this shift, but I'm wondering whether the shift will, continue to the point where it did, where Miles Sanders hardly saw any work, in this game. Moving on, Alvin. No, I'm not. That's way too far. I just went way too far. Mike, you got to cut that, bro. You got to cut that. Way too far. All right, I don't know what I'm doing over here. I don't know where I'm scrolling to. Sorry. Wake up, Mike. All right, I was kidding. Ceedee Lamb finally coming through, man. What a game. 14 targets, most of that damage coming in the first half. 12 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. 45% target share from Dak Prescott. This is the type of target share we want to see, okay? According to FantasyLife.com, the only other time he had a target share game of over 23% was week 2, when he had a 35% target share. We got to hope that this sticks, okay? The only other time he had a target share game of over 23% was week 2, when he had a 35% target share. We got to hope that this sticks. I did talk about selling Ceedee Lamb a few weeks ago, right? And if you did, this one definitely stings. But, hoping you got something good back, okay? Here's the thing. We saw CD's game in week 2, and we said, all right, here we go, right? Here's another one of these games. We had to wait 6 weeks to see it happen again, right? Will we see more consistency now? Will there be the same type of variance that we've seen so far moving forward? I don't know. But regardless, I hope you were on the right side of CD this week.
Yeah, and you can't take anything negative away from this performance, like you mentioned. He had a huge day, but you're absolutely on the money about being hesitant to take Ceedee Lamb back as a fantasy wide receiver 1. It's like taking back an X. You know what I mean? Not that Ceedee Lamb has been that bad, but you don't want to be like, okay, I can trust Ceedee Lamb to get it done now. He gets this target share. It looks really good. He has this massive performance. Is this going to be a consistent weekly thing? You just don't know. We've seen the same issues come up with Ceedee Lamb plenty of times before. Dallas just gets away from targeting him randomly. And when they do, it's for weeks at a time. But we've also heard this story before too, right? Like if I told you that Ceedee Lamb is averaging 39.5 fantasy points over the last 2 seasons in his first game after a bye, what would you say? He is. Lamb had a pretty much the exact same performance against Green Bay last year coming off his bye. 11 for 150 and 2 touchdowns. Today, 12 for 158 and 2 touchdowns. That was after he averaged 14.6 points per game before the bye in 2022. Then he has that big game against Green Bay after the bye. After the bye, he averaged 20.5 points per game the rest of the way. This year, Lamb averaged 14.9 points per game in the 6 weeks before the bye. Comes back after the bye, 150 and 2 touchdowns. I'm not superstitious. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the Cowboys look like they want to get the ball to Ceedee Lamb. They said it. They've been talking about it, and they did it in this game. Could post-bye Ceedee Lamb become something of fantasy mythology? I'm not going to rule it out, and it might be the Cowboys fan talking to me, but I think this can continue. Maybe not 14 targets a game, but they should definitely be getting him the ball more than they did through the first few games. I think it can happen, and we saw it before last season. I'm going to proceed with, a little hesitant optimism. If we see another game like this next week in a good matchup against the Eagles, if Jahan Dotson can get it done, Ceedee Lamb can get it done against them. If it happens again next week, we might have a conversation here about making him, one of those guys that hangs around the top 8, 9 receivers again, like we were the first few weeks of the season.
100%, man. 100%. On the other side of the ball, there was a split once again between Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman in terms of both snaps and opportunities. Freeman has been more efficient than Henderson in both games, and Freeman ended up getting a touchdown on one of his drives. And Henderson did end up getting the carry before Freeman to get them down to the 2-yard line, but it was Freeman who ended up getting the touchdown. Henderson did save his day, with a couple of catches, which ended up leading the Rams. Yes, the Rams with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Those Rams, Darrell Henderson led them in receiving with 54 yards. Now, it is worth noting that Matthew Stafford suffered an injury to his thumb on his throwing hand. Okay, so something to monitor for everyone who has Kupp and everyone who has Puka. He was supposed to return to the game. If the game was closer, would he have played? I don't know. Right? So that is something that's worth monitoring. If it's just a sprain, apparently he might not miss any time. But if there's something torn in there, he's going to potentially need surgery, and he could miss several weeks. So that wouldn't be good. So hoping that we get some good news on Monday.
Yeah, that's the biggest takeaway from the game for me. Obviously, Darrell Henderson came through relatively well, even though he didn't have a humongous day. But without Stafford, there's going to be serious issues with Kupp and Nacua moving forward. Hopefully, it's nothing long term, like you mentioned. It was a weird sequence in game because he suffered the injury. He had it before halftime, but then he came out in the second half and he played a drive, and then he was out the rest of the way. So that was weird. So there are issues to be sorted through when Ben Skoranek is the top fantasy scorer in a wide receiver room that has Kupp and Nacua. Dallas did a good job. It was a tough matchup coming in for both of these receivers, Kupp and Nacua, but neither of them came through at all for you today. I'm not a big fan of what I've seen from Matthew Stafford. It looks like it's going to be something that might last a little while. It's going to hurt the prospects of your two fantasy wide receivers in the Rams. So I'm not a fan of it, but hopefully he can come back. If Matthew Stafford's back within a week or two, I'm not worried about Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp.
Guys, you have to go check out our website and what we have going on there. Our weekly waiver wire rankings go up on Mondays. Tyler has his up like super early. He might even have it up tonight on Sunday night. Those are up tomorrow. I'll also have my waiver wire article with fab recommendations. So if you're looking for who to pick up this week, how much fab to spend, all that will be up on our website at upperhandfantasy.com. The main thing I wanted to highlight was that Zach is going to be putting out his newsletter that he does every single day on Monday morning at 9 a.m. You're going to get that Eastern time in your inbox for free, and you get that every single day. Okay, just like the stuff that he just talked about with Ceedee Lamb. Right, the post buy, potential allure with Ceedee Lamb. Is that going to become a thing now, where Ceedee Lamb is like once the buy hits Ceedee Lamb? Like, I'm sure that's going to be in your newsletter. Is it not?
Oh yeah, that's definitely gonna be the stat of the day. It's already in the works. I'm putting it in there. There'll be a cool graphic with it. You'll get that in your inbox. And I put stuff out like that every day. And then I don't know if you got it today. If you're listening to this, it would be yesterday. I put out the newsletter, and there was Brock Purdy with an Iron Man helmet on because apparently he's Iron Man and he can pass a concussion protocol in 4 days and come back. Now, granted, he didn't look very good, but just saying that was impressive. So there's all kinds of little stuff in there that you'll enjoy. I enjoy putting it together. So I hope that everybody that's listening and reads it enjoys it too. And it comes every single day, so you can count on it every morning.
So if you want to sign up for that, scroll down at upperhandfantasy.com on the homepage, all the way to the bottom, add your email, and you will get those for free in your inbox every single day. Okay, go check it out. Brutal, brutal, brutal injury for the Vikings, man. Kirk Cousins has torn his Achilles. Yes, I'm serious. This is not good. They're 4-4 now. No Kirk the rest of the way. This definitely hurts all of these Vikings pass catchers. Addison, Hawkinson, both having a wonderful year. Justin Jefferson, he was supposed to come back. The question now, do the Vikings ever shut down Jefferson? I think it's a legit question, right, with this injury. The thing is, like, their current record is going to allow us some breathing room, right? Like, they're not just throwing in the towel right now. If they had 2 wins, right, they're like 2-6, sure. But these guys, they're going to potentially play these guys, right? Like, for the foreseeable future, I think, because of their record, right? I think you have to downgrade Addison. You have to downgrade Jefferson. You have to downgrade Hawkinson, right? And like, I don't know, man. Like, even if Jefferson comes back, I don't think he's the wide receiver 1 the rest of the way. Even if he stays healthy. Like, you can't tell me that he becomes a better play than guys like A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, potentially, right? And look at how Joe Burrow looked today. Like, he looked way better. And we'll get to that, but this is a situation where this is not good for anybody on this Vikings team. And you drafted Justin Jefferson 101, but I think the rest of the way, he's not going to come through for you as the 101.
No, he can't. And that's not his fault either. And that's what sucks. And it's not Kirk Cousins' fault either. He was having a great season. But just for me, it sucks that Kirk Cousins went down, but I think the reality situation now, the Vikings, they're going to be a really tough watch on offense the rest of the season without Kirk Cousins because Kirk Cousins was everything for them. Minnesota was living and dying by the passing game. Now they don't have that to lean on anymore. It was a good run for Jordan Addison as a fantasy wide receiver 1. Past 2 weeks, he's been on fire, but that's going to go out the window at this point. Jefferson might be able to overcome the quarterback situation a little bit easier, a little bit better than Jordan Addison. But I think you're right about him not contending with the Tyreek Hills and A.J. Browns of the world when he does come back. Like, Minnesota scored their first rushing touchdown in the season today. That tells you they weren't relying at all on the run game. They were completely one-dimensional. They needed Kirk, and so did a lot of fantasy managers. And it sucks to see him goes down, and it's going to be an interesting offseason for the Vikings. Kirk Cousins is gone. Vikings offense is going to be pretty bad, if you ask me. And that's just my honest forecast for what we're seeing. Like, Jordan Addison, he's good, but I don't think he's to a point in his career yet where he's Justin Jefferson-esque and he can overcome that type of change at quarterback. You have to think that maybe blowing it all up, starting new, could be on the table this offseason for the Vikings. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle it because now Kirk Cousins, there were talks about him being traded. Now you don't even have to think about that anymore. No one's going to trade for him. So what do you do if you're the Vikings at this point? I think the biggest question, like you mentioned, is what happens. Do the Vikings just mail it in the rest of the season? I don't know. I hope not, but you're right. I think we have a couple weeks here where there's going to be serviceable fantasy performances. But after that, it gets a little hairy.
Yeah, man. Listen, I'd be trying to sell these guys if you can, to get anywhere. If you think you can get anywhere close to their value, coming into this game, right? I would try to do that. If you can. Like, in most leagues, you won't be able to. But some people might still want Addison on their team or Hawkinson on the team if they need a tight end, right? I would be trying to sell. Now, I like Jaron Hall, you know what I'm saying? But, like, he won't be able to keep these guys all propped up for fantasy. Okay? So, just saying. Kendrick Bourne was having a solid fantasy day before he hurt his knee in the fourth quarter. The hope is that it's not an ACL, but he'll have an MRI on Monday to see the extent of the injury. In the meantime, I think Demario Douglas should be picked up. I don't know what it is about this kid, Zach, but every time I watch him play, like, he just passes the eye test for me, right? He's also getting targeted at a 25% route per rate, per route run. That's what I'm trying to say here. He ended up leading the team in catches and targets this week. The offense sucked, but we might be able to find some fantasy value here if Bourne misses time. You know, I don't know. Whenever I watch him play, he reminds me of, okay, this is kind of crazy to say, okay? But his stature and his style reminds me of AB a little bit, okay? And I'm not saying that he's Antonio Brown, but like when I watch him play, his mannerisms, and I'm sure people who watch AB kind of know what I mean. Like the mannerisms kind of reminds me of him a little bit, just because he's like a smaller dude. Seems like a good route runner. I think they got something in him. They got him pretty late in drafts. Um, just a flyer. Somebody you add on your roster. Just wanna throw that out there.
Yeah, doesn't mean he has to be AB. But I think the word that, and I don't know if maybe I can characterize it for people who don't know what you're talking about with AB, but he gets the ball and he looks slippery. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't like plod around. He can move. He's got like a twitch to him. It's weird. Right. Yeah. He's in control of himself. But I hear you. Like this isn't a situation where right. Yeah. That's a conversation for another time. I just like I don't know if you've seen the video of him teeing off at the one golf course. It's just freaking hilarious. He's like with one arm, he chucks it. There's this huge divot. You could have a whole episode on AB. That's hilarious. AB was great though in his prime.
I have Antonio Brown. I have a signed jersey, framed jersey in my office. Okay, I have a lot of Antonio Brown memorabilia because like he won me a lot of fantasy championships straight up.
That's sick. That's awesome. But yeah. But back to Douglas quick, recenter for just a second here. No, you're fine. But I'm just saying, like, I'm not starting Douglas. It's not like suddenly, and it's gonna be tough to rebut this after we just talked about comparing him to AB. But you're not starting Douglas in any capacity larger than you were starting Bourne in. He's going to be a flex play at best. Bourne was actually pretty reliable on fantasy teams, though, and it's going to be interesting to see what Mac Jones does without Bourne because he was like his go-to guy. But there's potential with Douglas. Just don't go blowing up your fab budget on him. If he's on your waiver wire, you don't have to throw all this fab at him because we're making this comparison. Obviously, just it. It's so tough telling you not to do that. You just compared him to AB. It's hilarious.
I'm gonna ask our producer Mike to name this episode "The Next AB?" question mark.
Yeah. Oh my god, that's gonna be great.
That's gonna work out really well.
Yeah.
He did. All joking aside, he did lead the Patriots in routes run in this game. It could be a little something something. For you to just grab on the waiver wire for cheap. That's all. Yeah. Alvin Kamara, yet another amazing game for him. Only 4 catches, but took it 51 yards receiving, right, and a touchdown. We talked about the Colts not being able to contain these running backs in the receiving game. Kamara ended up with the touchdown through the air and on the ground, and of course Taysom Hill had to steal some rushing touchdowns away, 2 of them. Okay, he only had 1 catch, so he didn't really play tight end. I mean, he did run some routes, but he had 9 carries in this game. Jahan Dotson was back, right, at tight end as your lead tight end. But Taysom Hill is like one of the most random fantasy plays. Like as soon as you throw him in your lineup, he might not come through. But like, what do you do with Taysom? Like, do you just have him in your throw him on your roster, throw him in your lineup until this stops? Because he can easily go back to being a non-factor at some point, which we've seen in the past, where like there'll be like a 3-week window where he like absolutely kills it. You throw him in your lineup, and then he's like a non-factor for the rest of the season. Like, I'm not sure I can trust him, despite the way that he's been scoring.
Yeah, I'm not trusting him at all. And sorry, like what we've seen from him the past 3 weeks looks really good. He has 3 straight top 6 tight end finishes, weekly finishes at the tight end position. Good for him. But we know what happens with Taysom Hill, like you outlined. The highs are really high with Hill because 11 points out of a tight end nowadays feels like striking gold. But the lows, they've been demonstrably low too. I mean, we know that Taysom Hill is going to have a game where he does nothing at some point. He's going to get like 1 carry and 1 target, and that's it. Like, he's not going to have this type of workload every single week. I'm not dealing with the headache. You can roster him, sure, but you're not going to be able to rely on him on a weekly basis. I don't like dealing with that. I'm never going to spend another roster spot on Taysom Hill again unless he keeps doing this for a long period of time. Like, your trust is completely violated with Taysom Hill. You're never going to be able to have that full trust with him. And that's not a bad thing. He's that boom bust type player. I just don't want to deal with that right now. And if you had Taysom Hill in your lineup this week, great. But Kamara, like you mentioned too, just to hit on him, opposite of Taysom Hill right now. He's just completely on fire. And he should have had a bigger day, like you mentioned, because Taysom Hill shouldn't be getting all those carries, especially over Alvin Kamara in those situations. Kamara, even when he's running the ball, like, we talk about his ability to catch the ball, but after the catch, after contact, like he's on fire. He looked really good today. Now, the stats might not, but on his 2 touchdowns, he was running through guys. The one was a catch and the other one was a run. But both of them they were from like 10 or 11 yards out, and he ran 5 or 6 yards through contact to get to it. So maybe not, it might not show up in the stat sheet, but he was great.
He has these special plays, all the time, and he shows it. So it's good to see it though, for sure. Your weekly Jonathan Taylor workhorse check, I'm checking now, and no, he's not a workhorse yet. Zach Moss is banged up all week, okay? And these dudes still split opportunities 50-50. Zach Moss ended up with the goal line touchdown, okay? The fact that Moss is outsnapping JT in short yardage and goal line situations perplex me, okay? When is it going to happen for JT, Zach? Is it going to ever happen?
I have no idea. I think it's going to happen. Let's just preface the whole conversation here with that. It's going to happen at some point, but for some reason, like I thought this would be the week that we finally saw him take over, and it looked like he was going to because Zach Moss, he was actually questionable coming into the game, but that was flipped on his head in this one. Like, I don't know if you noticed, and maybe it was just me because there wasn't a whole lot on Twitter about it, but I did dig it up. Taylor, he was actually a little hobbled after one of the plays in like late second quarter. And they actually mentioned that on the broadcast. I think they said like Jonathan Taylor came up a little gimpy and Moss was in after that, you know? Now, I don't want to say that was a complete, shift in the carries because Moss was in for handfuls of plays at a time. Even before that, it was like chunks. And they were almost like doing it like, okay, you get your drive. Now you get 2 drives. Now the next guy gets 1 drive. And then it's back to Moss, back to Taylor. It's all over the place. So I'm still waiting for that to change. At this point, your guess is as good as mine when it's going to happen. But I have faith that Taylor's going to have a handle on things soon enough, even after this game. Because again, and the Colts are an interesting organization, so I guess I can't put it past them. But who pays a running back all that money and doesn't give him a workhorse role? I don't know. Maybe they're like thinking we can preserve him so he's not going to be completely run out like Saquon Barkley's going to be after today's game. Maybe they'll preserve him because they have him on that long-term contract anymore, which it's possible, but that's a lot of speculation right now. I think eventually Jonathan Taylor is going to get there, and it should be in these next few weeks. But we've been saying that since he's been back.
Yeah, he only had a couple of opportunities in the second half. It seems like there was a potential injury, and if anything, it was an ankle. So just monitor that. He did have all the 12 carries that he did get, or 12 touches that he did get in the first half. I mean, overall in this game happened in the first half. Okay, so that's something to monitor here. That's probably why this ended up happening. So that's a good call, Zach, on that one. Darren Waller ended up hurting his hamstring earlier in this game. It was almost like something inevitable for Darren Waller. Like at least it feels like that now. But be prepared to be without him next week. He's an older guy with a hamstring strain who's had a lot of history with hamstring strains. So just I would say just worry about that. That's what I would say. I wouldn't even say like just look out for it. I would just say just be worried. Also, the Giants better hope that Daniel Jones is back next week, and it doesn't seem like he is going to be back next week because Tyrod Taylor might have suffered broken ribs. He had to go straight to the hospital after being taken out of the game. Tommy DeVito came in as their third string quarterback, and they hardly threw the ball after that. Saquon Barkley literally had 36 carries in this game. Great way to get him hurt again. But the game was close, and the Jets ended up pulling the game off late in a miraculous way. Okay, the Jets are 4-3. Okay, let's fuck go. Okay, the Jets, we're gonna make the playoffs. Aaron Rodgers is gonna come back, and we're gonna win the Super Bowl.
You're winning the Super Bowl.
Okay,
Jets Cowboys Super Bowl. It's coming. No, I didn't victory lap the Cowboys game. So it's fine. I'll just say that Jets Cowboys Super Bowl. But yeah, this was a ridiculous game. Like I knew it was gonna be messy, but not this messy. Like look. Just do me a favor. Anybody who's listening or right now, or even you, Faraz, right now while I'm talking about this, look at the game, like the box score for the Giants game. There's 3 targets to receivers, 2 targets to Darren Waller. Daniel Bellinger won at 6 times, 7 times, something like that. I don't know. But and when they were throwing the ball, it was. I mean, this is after Tyrod Taylor was out. It was like exclusively behind the line of scrimmage. If you were watching the game, right? did you see that last sequence? I think it was the last drive, or the second last drive, very late in the game. The Giants had the ball. They ran the same behind the line pass play to Saquon Barkley 2 times in a row, both times for losses. And it's like, I get having a short leash with a guy named Tommy DeVito coming in at quarterback, but you're not going to let him throw past the line of scrimmage. Like that's exactly how you lose the game. Good for the Jets. They won the game, but the Giants' offense is in total shambles. I don't know what to think. If it's not Daniel Jones next week, you can't start any of these pass catchers. And this isn't a Will Levis situation. It's just discussing what we saw. Not that you were really planning on doing that anyway, even if Daniel Jones was back. But now that Waller's out, there is nothing going on for the Giants passing game. And Brian DeVol, he's just standing there in the rain like a blueberry because he's just standing there like looking up at the jumbotron like, what are we doing? Oh, running the ball 36 times to Saquon Barkley didn't work. I'm amazed they came away with 10 points. I couldn't believe it.
It's funny, man. It really is. Yeah, you cannot start any of these guys next week. Cannot. And it's funny how we keep alluding to the Titans, but we're not going to talk about them until much later. So it's just a little bit of a tease throughout the episode. But you know the good news on the Jets side though, like Zach Wilson's getting the ball to the guys who matter, right? Garrett Wilson got 13 targets. He went 7 for 100. Breece Hall got 9 targets. Went 6 for 76 through the air with that long 50-yard touchdown. So he's doing Breece Hall things, dude. How good does that dude look, man? Like, is there any running back who looks better than Breece Hall right now? Travis Etienne, maybe?
Travis Etienne looks good.
Christian McCaffrey?
Yeah, but Brees Hall's right up there.
Breece Hall's right up there in terms of, like, who's looking good, who's making big plays, right? Like, it's those 3 guys pretty much. Like, am I missing somebody?
No, but Brees Hall's in that category where it's like the Christian McCaffrey situation where it's like he could be even better if he was on a better team. And I'm not shitting on the Jets here, but we know the Jets offense is holding Brees Hall back and he's still producing. So it's just something to, mention right there. If the Jets offense, like, could you imagine the season Brees Hall would be having if Aaron Rodgers was playing? I know you've had that thought. And I know a lot of people have had that thought, but like it's just whew. Yeah, he's doing great. He's doing great. He's showing us that he is that guy. So moving forward, you don't have to worry about Brees Hall, but just man, what could have been still just hangs around.
Breece Hall was doing it last year. Like, Breece Hall was doing it with Zach Wilson, too, which is kind of crazy. George Pickens, he ended up with 1 catch in this game. It ended up being a touchdown from Mitch Trubisky with Kenny Pickett getting hurt in this game. Deontay Johnson ended up with 14 targets. That makes up a 33% target share. Only 5 targets for Pickens. The one time I ranked Pickens over Deontay, maybe I should have just stuck to my guns about these two. You know, Pickett also missed Deontay on what should have been a very easy touchdown in the second quarter. So it's a rib injury for Pickett. Apparently, he could have come back in the game, but it looks like they held him out for precautionary reasons. It's possible he's back next week, but we'll see. I want to see, this wide receiver core moving forward as well. Coming in, Deontay Johnson was that dude. Into this game with George Pickens on such a tear, I'm like, you know what? Let me rank him above Deontay for 1 week. See what happens.
Yeah, that's what happens. I'm pretty sure I had Deontay Johnson over George Pickens, and I'm not going to victory lap that because both of them were playing very well coming into the game. At least Deontay Johnson, we knew what he was, and George Pickens was playing well. But I'm just glad that Deontay Johnson came back and he was able to remind everyone that he's that guy. He's still the target machine that we've been talking all offseason about him being. And I don't think it's going to be this drastic every week where it's like George Pickens has 1 catch on 5 targets. And it's going to, like, this is like the exact performance that we needed to push the stereotype that George Pickens can't earn targets with Deontay Johnson in the lineup. Like, this is going to be poster board material. What's it called? Yeah, just that type of material for anybody who's pushing that narrative. I think George Pickens has a better chance of holding up and having his own role, getting those targets than he did last season. But Deontay Johnson coming back shows you that he's going to be reliable. We were drafting him as a wide receiver 3 with plenty of upside because of that target share that he was getting. And Deontay Johnson, he's earned targets from both Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. He has that track record. So I'm cool with what we saw from Deontay Johnson. I don't think, like I mentioned, it's going to be this drastic, but definitely encouraging because it looks like there can be 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers here. Obviously, low fantasy output today against the Jaguars, but I'm not out on either of these guys, even with the injury, because I don't think it's that much of a step down from Kenny Pickett to Mitch Trubisky.
Yeah, no, I hear that. It's not a step down. It's not. But there is some continuity there with Pickett that might be good. And also some, if you have Pickens, you know that there is a connection between Pickett and Pickens too, right? That's been clear, right? There's also a connection between Deontay, but like we've seen the connection with Pickens as well. So we're finally here. What a surprising performance from rookie quarterback Will Levis. 238 passing yards with 4 passing touchdowns. Quite the debut. That led to DeAndre Hopkins catching 4 balls for 123 yards and 3 touchdowns. Hopkins was left to dead this, coming into this week, given the quarterback situation. But it looks like we all underestimated Levis. All right. Levis can run the ball as well, okay? And he's a big body, similar to Josh Allen. So I think he should be picked up even in one quarterback leagues. Not sure he has to be started, but at least put him on your bench for now. This is a huge boost for anyone who got Levis late in dynasty rookie drafts as well, right? This is a big boost in value. So, do what you want here, in terms of like whether you want to sell him or not. But at least you have something now, right? Listen, if this actually turns into a good offense this year, right, and then Levis actually turns out to be good, this would be a huge boost for Derrick Henry as well, right? The Titans already told him that they're not trading him, right? He got a bunch of carries in this game, high snap share in this game. This offense with Tannehill has been absolutely terrible, okay? So there is a chance that, if he doesn't have to play this well, right? Like he played today. Like he played really good. Like he was like so comfortable. He was like pump faking. He was like pump faking downfield, throwing it downfield. Like, and this is a good Atlanta secondary, right? Like they've been pretty good on the perimeter. That's one of the reasons why I was out on Hopkins this week, because of the matchup, and on top of that, the quarterback situation going into the week. Now, quarterback situation might not be so bad.
No, and I think part of why people were underestimating Levis, we weren't expecting this performance, was because they said coming into the performance, they're like, oh well, Malik Willis and Will Levis, they're gonna like split snaps. It's gonna be like a platoon at quarterback. It's like I don't want to see Malik Willis on the field, 15, 20 snaps, and Will Levis on the field 15, 20 snaps. Like I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, and I think that threw a lot of people off too. If I knew Will Levis was going to play the full game, I'm not saying that I would have had him ranked anywhere near where he finished, but I'm going to say that I would have been at least a little bit more intrigued by what we were going to get from him this week. And he comes out, he throws 4 touchdowns. Like this is great. And what makes it so great and what makes it actually interesting and intriguing moving forward is that he looked 10 times better than anything we've seen from Ryan Tannehill over the past 2 years. Like, he looks so much more dynamic. He's youth, He's not old man Tannehill who's just holding on to his career. And I don't want to throw Tannehill under the bus that much, but you look at what Will Levis was doing. The deep ball was so on point. And you're throwing DeAndre Hopkins, it's going to look good. But every single time, like he was doing it, it looked Lamar Jackson-esque. Like just flick. He wasn't going past his ear. He was just like flicking it out there. And it would go and it has this high arc, spin forever in the air. And it would just literally, it looked like the receiver could just run out there and someone would hand it to him. It just dropped right in the bucket every single time. And the same thing happened. He had a pass to Treylon Burks that was out of bounds. That was also a beautiful pass. So like, he looks good, right? And I think you're on it. I think that you should definitely add him in 1 QB leagues, definitely in 2 QB leagues if he wasn't on any roster at this point. He has a chance to be startable in fantasy, and that's all you can really ask for right now. This is a guy that's come from completely off the map. He wasn't even an option a couple of weeks ago, not even 24 hours ago. We weren't even thinking about Will Levis being some fantasy option moving forward. Now he has that, so go get him.
So, listen, I fully admit, can this be a flash in the pan game? Yes, okay? But I just want to lay out the possibilities here. Can Treylon Burks also become fantasy relevant? Can Chig Okonkwo potentially be fantasy relevant? Okay? Have an open mind. It could happen. Keep those guys on your radar. Just saying.
That's what it is. Just the difference. And just to hit on again, you mentioned like you think it's crazy. Sounds crazy? Yes, it's because it is, but it's also crazy because we didn't think there was any light at the end of the tunnel for the Titans offense. Now there is. So don't give up completely.
Full context, I also picked up Will Levis in all my Superflex leagues. Just saying. All right, moving on. It seems as though Desmond Ridder got benched in this game for Taylor Heineke, but according to Arthur Smith, he was not taken out for performance issues. It does sound ridiculous because everything that Arthur Smith says is ridiculous, but Ridder did get checked for a concussion early and was cleared, but they just chose to stick with Heineke, okay? So I think that's what he's referring to. But it seems like he thought that a concussed Ridder might play worse than a non-concussed Ridder, and I'm not sure if that would be the case. It doesn't seem like there will be a quarterback change in Week 9. If that's the case, I would assume that Desmond Ridder. He said that they have all the confidence in Ridder. I'm assuming that Ridder's going to be their week 9 starter.
Yeah, and I guess that's okay. Taylor Heineke, he looked all right, but he looked like the Taylor Heineke that we know. I think either way, you're going to have Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke, whoever's in, they're going to support the offense the same way that the other is. I don't think there's much of a change because Desmond Ridder, he moves a little bit. He has that mobility, but so does Taylor Heineke. Neither of them are great throwing the ball, but they're very similar quarterbacks, I feel like. So the change that would happen, even if there was a quarterback change, I don't think the situation around them would be altered really at all. You won't have to worry about it. And I think that Desmond Ridder, it's only I think that if Taylor Heineke starts, you might have a slightly more stable fantasy production at quarterback if he would play, if that makes sense. Because Desmond Ridder turns the ball over so much. And it's not always like interceptions. It's just like it kind of goes under the radar because he's dropping the ball all the time. He fumbles. He keeps fumbling. It's just a mess. I'm not interested in starting either of these Falcons quarterbacks, but I think regardless of who's starting, you're going to be able to get the same production out of the supporting cast that you would with either of them. So I'm not worried about any change, even if it does happen.
Keep an eye on Drake London's groin injury. He left the game in the third quarter. If he's out, you'd have to think that it would benefit Kyle Pitts, but it's also possible that someone like Kadarius Hodge just ends up picking up more targets like he did in this game.
Because he's not a first round pick that they drafted.
Exactly. You're not allowed to throw to first round picks if you play for Arthur Smith. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet split work in this game. Okay, Walker was playing well, but Charbonnet was very involved. Like Walker had a huge 50-yard run early in the game, and he didn't have a touch for a quarter and a half after that. Now Walker didn't practice earlier in the week, right? Two days in a row with a calf injury. My guess is that they decided to limit his touches a bit in this game. It's also possible, though, that they wanted to work Charbonnet in more, right? That's a likely scenario as well. So, Charbonnet did look good in this game. So, he had some key runs. So, we'll see what the situation is moving forward. We did see something like this earlier in the year, but it just became Walker's show after that. So, it could be either of these situations, but the fact that he was a DNP twice Wednesday and Thursday this week, leads me to believe that it's possible that it's because of that, and they just didn't want to overwork him in this game.
Yeah. I like to think that's a solid rationale and it makes sense. But I just also can't help but think that this is like the dream scenario that Pete Carroll's been cooking up ever since he took Zach Charbonnet in the second round. Like I can't help but think that's like this is exactly what he was looking for. Where and much to the chagrin of us fantasy managers and players and all that stuff, it's like he wants to have this committee backfield where there's two very good running backs that he can use. I'm surprised that Zach Charbonnet got this much run, but I'm also not surprised that he looked as good as he did. I just think that Kenneth Walker is still just a little bit higher on a higher level than Zach Charbonnet is right now. But the fact that they split work is definitely something worth noting. You did mention that I would also say it too, that Kenneth Walker was a little banged up coming in this one. So I think next week, if it goes back to Kenneth Walker, I wouldn't be surprised. But I would be surprised, I think, if this kind of sticks, this at least 50-50 split. Like, could Zach Charbonnet see a little bit more of an increase in workload? Sure. But if it keeps along these lines of 50-50, I'm not going to be very happy about that. And there might be a reason to worry about Kenneth Walker at that point. But until then, I'm still treating this backfield like I was.
This was our worry coming into the year with Kenneth Walker, that Zach Charbonnet, who's drafted early, would be very involved. We just haven't seen that. Is this the start of that? Maybe. I thought it was the start of that several weeks ago, like in week 2. And then it just went back to Walker. But will that happen again, or is Charbonnet going to be pretty involved here? We'll see. Something to monitor moving forward. I'm still going to rank Walker as like a, RB1 play next week, right? But I'm going to be watching for it for sure. Joe Burrow was looking real good in this game, man. He was back. Okay, I had him pretty high in my rankings. It panned out. 28 for 32 passing, 283 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jamar Chase 10 for 100 and a touchdown. T. Higgins 5 for 69 on 6 targets. This offense is back. Burrow is back. He was running around like he had no issues at all. Joe Mixon's back because this offense back. Because this offense is back, is what I'm trying to say. And it's what you want to see, unless you're a 49ers fan. Okay. The Bengals going into San Francisco, getting a huge win. They're back.
Yeah, you can't say they're not, and this is what we were hoping we would see. Like we were all cautiously optimistic, I think, coming into this game that this is the type of performance that we saw, and we did. So that's awesome. Joe Burrow's back. Do you think we talked about it on the podcast last week? Do you think Joe Burrow is now comfortably in that QB1 conversation again? I know we said like maybe he'll be there. I think he's definitely there. And you mentioned Joe Mixon. That's great. That's like a side note thing. We talked about Joe Burrow coming back, and Jamar Chase is back too because of that. But the fact that Joe Mixon is also back, he was just like hitting that ceiling. He couldn't break through it. Now suddenly he breaks through it because the offense is back. This is just ah, it's great to be back in fantasy land. You know, it's back to normalcy. Joe Burrow is going to be a QB1. Jamar Chase is going to be a wide receiver one. Joe Mixon is going to be a low end RB1. I think we can kind of book that for the rest of the way as long as everybody stays healthy at this point. And it was against the 49ers, who, granted, you've been able to throw on them. And I also talked about this, just a little side note too. It's interesting. Nothing to do with fantasy, but it seems like whoever plays Dallas and beats them is cursed with losing. Cardinals beat the Cowboys. They haven't won. The Niners beat the Cowboys. They haven't won. Just interesting. Just throwing that out there. I think it's funny. I'm not sure if that losing streak is going to continue because I think the 49ers are good. But the fact that the Bengals were able to do that against a pretty good 49ers defense, like that gives you confidence that they're going to be able to keep this up the rest of the way.
Yeah, man. I had Joe Burrow as my QB6 coming into the week. He's a QB4 as it stands right now, as of before the Sunday Night Football game. Javonte Williams just got a huge boost in value. This is not a split backfield right now. 27 carries. The training wheel seemed to have come off. 30 total touches for him in this game. He caught a receiving touchdown. Huge for his value moving forward. If this type of share in the backfield continues, Jaleel McLaughlin and Samaje Perine only combined for 9 touches. The Broncos ended up winning this game against the Chiefs in a huge upset against this is one of the biggest upsets of the year. They played the Chiefs well twice this year. All the Chiefs players ended up underperforming this week, so don't take too much out of this game. But this is very interesting, right, for Javonte Williams moving forward.
Yeah, and you have to upgrade him. I wasn't expecting this workload. You know, I'll come out and just say that right away. Like I thought that Jaleel McLaughlin would keep getting, or McLaughlin, I think that's how you pronounce it. We had that discussion before. I thought that he'd have a little bit more run. He did look good. You know, he had a couple runs. He looked good. He averaged just over 8 yards a carry. So he looks fine. But the fact that Javonte Williams, 27 carries and that receiving touchdown, like you mentioned, it looks like he's going to be getting that workload that we've been pounding the table for since he's been in the league. You know, it's great to see. Now, the other thing that was interesting to me was that the fact that the Broncos won. I kind of had a feeling, and I'm not going to say it's easy to say in hindsight, but they said about Patrick Mahomes having like a flu game. They put him on the injury report, and that was like, definitely giving credence to the Falcons situation where they didn't say anything about Bijan Robinson last week. They were just covering their bases, putting Patrick Mahomes on the injury report. They said he was dealing with the flu. Flu game didn't go how Michael Jordan's flu game went for Patrick Mahomes, but I just figured it looked like something was really off, and I think it might have been that. So, like you mentioned, I'm definitely giving the Chiefs a mulligan here. It's just tough because they lost to one of the worst teams in the league right now.
Huge game from Gus Edwards in a good matchup. 19 carries for 80 yards and 3 touchdowns. Great time to sell. Okay, this was a great matchup. He had a couple of good games already now, and now he gets Seattle and Cleveland next, which are not good matchups. Okay, so I wouldn't expect a whole lot from Gus Edwards over the next 2 games, personally. Zay Flowers shit the bed in this one. You know, he got the targets, but didn't get the production. Only 5 catches for 19 yards. We have to have the conversation now. You know, is this a buy low opportunity once again, Zach, or are we a little worried with his usage in terms of his average depth of target? Right, he's had a few games now with him not being able to produce down the field, which keeps his targets high but his yardage low. You know, the air yards have been there, in certain games, but like it's kind of going up and down for the most part this year.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern, and it sucks because this was a really good matchup for him. I was expecting a lot more. The targets are there, and we can lean on the target share all that we want. I've been leaning on his target share for the past couple of weeks. Like, he's been on my notes for all of our buy sells episodes for the past couple of weeks as a buy. But you mentioned the air yard share. Now it's like rearing its ugly head again. How do you catch 5 balls and only have 19 yards? It's because he's not getting targeted downfield. The Ravens offense the passing offense wasn't great in this one. So I don't want to say that like Zay Flowers, if the passing offense is bad, I think it makes sense that he's going to have limited production. But 19 yards limited is a little bit drastic, especially when it's something that we've seen before. So I think you're onto something there with Zay Flowers. Maybe you don't buy him right now. You could still buy him. It could still turn around. The target share is there, but maybe at this point we tone it down a little bit with that conversation because I'm not sure where the upside is going to be coming from if he's not getting those downfield targets. We've been saying that he should get those downfield targets. I still think he should get those targets, but he's not. And at this point, you got to just kind of got to temper expectations at this point. He might not be the type of play that we want him to be. He might be maxing out at a low wide receiver too until we see that number change.
He has a couple tough matchups coming up too here. Seattle, Cleveland, Cincinnati. But the good thing is that they're all at home. Okay, so he gets a little bit of a boost there, but at the same time, the matchups are a little tough. Okay, over the next couple of weeks. On the Cardinal side of the ball, Emari Demercado was the guy. 20 carries in this one. He didn't score, right? So you got a bunch of you got a bunch of carries, but no score. So that's not good. He also wasn't using the receiving game much. None of these running backs were targeted in this game. It was all wide receivers and tight ends. And speaking of tight end, my guy Trey McBride with the breakout game that we were anticipating. 10 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown on 14 targets. That accounted for 38% target share. That led the team by far. We're looking at someone who could be a tight end you're starting the rest of the season. All right, we talked about making sure that you picked him up already. We pounded the table for you this week. And, he's still available in a ton of leagues. He's only rostered in like 15% of leagues right now. Okay, so he's going to be a top waiver wire ad this week, maybe number one overall.
Yeah, go get him. And that's the bottom line. We talked about him kind of absorbing Zach Ertz's role, but Zach Ertz wasn't getting 14 targets. Trey McBride, he's obviously a good talent. You talked about that at length over the past year or so. Getting in, you went to Senior Bowl. We have that whole story on the last episode. I think you talked about that. But Trey McBride, he's going to be probably the second wide receiver, not wide receiver, but second receiving option that you go to in this offense now. Kind of what Zach Ertz was doing already, but I think he might be actually an upgrade in terms of what he could do after the catch, all that kind of stuff, because he's younger and he's more of an athlete. It was an interesting game because it was a really low scoring game for the Cardinals until the last couple minutes, and it felt like the game went forever because they kept, changing possession and scoring, but he definitely capitalized on that. I was expecting 10 catches. Like I would have been happy with 5 or 6, and he ended up with 10. So not like this. I don't think either of us were expecting this big of a blow up, but he's on the map now, and he's going to continue to be at this point.
100%, man. So yeah, definitely go pick him up. By the way, their head coach has already come out and said that Kyler Murray is not going to play next week, but he'll be potentially back the week after. Okay, so it's still going to be Josh Dobbs next week. Okay. That's going to do it for this episode, guys. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening. If you could subscribe to the podcast, hit follow on the podcast app, that would mean the world to us. If you can leave a 5-star review, that would be even better. But we appreciate you. We'll be back tomorrow with the waiver wire ads. We'll talk to you soon. Take it easy. Have a great night. Bye-bye.